Hi everyone, I'm Jaden Cook,
I'm Christina Nguyen.
and today we're going to talk about peanut allergies,
Mm-hmm.
specifically in infants and young children, the best way to intervene, and if early introduction in their life of the allergen actually helps them have resistance to the allergy or get it in the first place. So Christina, if you want to start off, what's your experience with peanut allergies?
Well, I never had allergies myself growing up. Neither did any of my family. But kind of related, not really related. When I was younger, I used to be like obsessed with drinking these soy milk drinks. Used to drink them all the freaking time. Stopped for a little bit because I got really sick of them, and then a few years later, I kind of developed some sort of reaction to it.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like drank it at my friend's house, and then I felt really nauseous. I felt like my skin was itchy.
Oh wow.
My stomach was all up in shambles, and I was like, I need to go home. So I called my mom. She picked me up. But anywho, I don't know what happened. It's kind of like the reverse of what we're talking about today.
Absolutely, yeah. Like a late stage introduction to an allergy.
Yeah, but my body was always introduced to it, so it's like maybe
what
it's
changed,
like
right?
withdrawals. Like
I have no idea. But it's funny that you say that. I had a very similar experience growing up where I didn't have any allergies. Pretty much my family didn't have any allergies. But I love peanut butter. Always have loved peanuts, just anything with any of those ingredients in them. However, when I was in elementary school, I had a few friends that were like deathly allergic to peanuts.
Yeah.
So that was always kind of an interesting dynamic where we'd all play at recess, we'd get like really close and do all this stuff. And then as soon comes lunchtime, they have to go to the peanut table.
Yeah.
And when we were doing our research, you were saying that you actually didn't know or you weren't familiar with what a peanut table was.
Yeah, I didn't know. I saw it, like you had mentioned it in our research kind of document. And I was like, what the frick is a peanut table? So I looked it up. I was like, is it like a table shaped like a peanut or something? So I looked it up on Google, what is peanut table? And then I found out that it's like a table designated for kids with peanut allergies. I'm like, that must be so alienating, and I could only imagine being one of those kids because I would hate to be one of those kids.
Oh, yeah, 100%. And I think at the same time, my friends didn't really care that much. They had all of their allergy friends that they could eat with and stuff. But I do always remember being really bummed that we had to sit apart because especially if you're really close, you know, and lunch and sharing meals is such an important part of everyone's cultures, right? I was always like really sad I couldn't eat my sandwich next to them.
Yeah, I remember like being in elementary school, like always trading lunch items with my friends.
Yeah.
Like, I'll trade you this for that, but you couldn't do that.
And I bet that's exactly why they have that table because it takes one kid not knowing that he gave his friend a snack with peanuts in it, and then to have maybe even a really bad reaction like anaphylactic shock, and then something terrible happens.
And like kids don't even. I doubt that they know how to like use an EpiPen or that they're even thinking about it.
Right, exactly, yeah. And you know, that's why we have the guardians and the people who are monitoring the lunchtime and all that stuff.
Duties.
Yeah, exactly. But it's although an alienating process, it's interesting and it does make sense, but it's kind of, I wonder if they'll have something that's a little bit more inclusive later on. I've also heard of schools doing something where they have a no peanut policy where you actually can't come to the entirety of the school with anything with peanuts in it.
But that's so...
It's kind of totalitarian,
right?
I
feel like that's too much because literally there's so many things made with peanut butter. Not
100%.
Even if it may not be like the whole peanut itself, like peanut extract, oil, essence, like powder, etc.
There's all those granola bars that just have mixed nuts in them too, and snacks and everything. But that's an entirely different conversation that we could have another time. What I was actually going to say is that when I was doing my research and especially talking to people about this issue, a lot of them, including me, couldn't actually define what an allergy is. I remember in physiology a couple years back when I was taking it, we learned about the kind of immune response to an allergen, but when it gets down to like the brass tacks, I feel like if you ask somebody on the street what an allergy is, they would know the symptoms, but they wouldn't really know what the process is. Yeah. So do you want to explain what that is?
Yeah. So honestly, I found it really interesting doing this research because like I didn't realize that I was kind of in the same bracket of like I knew only the symptoms and
Right.
not what was actually happening in the body.
Exactly, yeah.
But basically, when you eat like something you're allergic to, in this case a peanut, your body sees it immediately as a harmful substance, and I don't know why, but we'll get into that later. It sees it as a harmful substance, and it basically produces antibodies, which are the immunoglobulins.
Right, like white blood cells.
White blood cells,
Yeah.
like the mast cells and basophils,
Right,
etc. And you could get into that in a little bit because I know you know.
I do,
about
yeah.
that.
Well, I did some research on
Yeah.
it, yeah.
But anywho, like they secrete those, and basically the allergic reactions taking place, like the hives, the itchy skin, anaphylaxis, the swelling, whatever. That's your body fighting against the harmful substance.
Right, and what's really interesting is those white blood cells and immunoresponses, especially the things that cause you to increase your secretion of histamine, which is a pro-inflammatory hormone, is super important for a ton of different things. Especially the one that comes to mind is like, I was always a kid playing sports or like getting kind of beat up at recess, and what happens when you like bump your knee or scuff something is that you kind of get a swelling where that area is, and that's histamine actually responding to that cut or abrasion, bringing in blood, which also in turn brings in all those things that can kill bacteria and stuff that would be trying to get in to infect you or like hurt you even worse. So what's interesting is that such a critical function of your body saving itself can actually be the reason that you hurt yourself, or even, it's fatal.
Yeah, it's to the point where it's over secreted and it produces this massive effect of these symptoms, like anaphylaxis, like
a shock response,
like lungs swelling up, or like your throat swelling up and you can't breathe. So it's really crazy how your body can really help you but also be against you
100%.
at the same time.
Yeah. And last thing I want to talk about when it comes to allergies is actually like the mental note, because we already talked about kind of the alienation of sitting at the peanut table or maybe not being able to share snacks with your friends if you're a little kid, but the anxiety is shared by parents who actually do have children with peanut allergies.
I read something about like 90% of parents with children who have peanut allergies face like a ton of anxiety and fear.
Oh, of course.
And I could only imagine, because like, off note, I have a cat, not really a child, but my child.
Oh, 100%. No, that's your child.
I thought she like ran away, and I like never experienced so much fear in my life. Like I literally cried, and I didn't expect that. But anywho, if I had a real child with like a peanut allergy like that, I would be livid like all the freaking time.
Oh yeah.
And like, I also read like 30% of those parents like go to therapy for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
I
mean, it's like crazy how it can affect you that much psychology wise.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's something where it's almost like out of your control as a caregiver, because you send your kids off to school or after school program or something, and you're giving their health in the hands of trusted guardians, but it's always that creeping kind of anxiety of like, what if something happens?
Yeah. Well, I think that's why like parents nowadays are so overprotective and over sheltering with their children, and like that goes into like the hygiene hypothesis.
Right.
Where I also did research, like that may be one of the reasons why our body finds like certain things as harmful substances, where it's almost like a shock to your body, like it's not used to it
because it's been so sheltered.
Yeah, because it's like never experienced or like felt anything like this. And like in my experience, also off topic, like my tattoo on my ribs, like first time I got it, just the outline, cried, bawled. I was biting, grabbing
super painful.
The pillow,
right?
Like crazy, and I was like moving like a worm, caterpillar, whatever. And the second time I got it to shade a little bit in that area, I fell asleep. So I was really shocked by like my difference in reaction. It's almost as if like my body just had to get used to it, or like be introduced to it that one time. So I wonder if it's like the same thing with the peanut allergies. Like your body just needs to get used to things or be introduced, like exposure therapy.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that actually kind of leads into the main thing we're trying to research for this topic is if early introduction helps with resistance or the elimination of peanut allergies. And some of the studies and findings we found were really interesting. Basically, in our research, we did notice that there was 2 or 3 studies that kind of cited early introduction of foods kind of in the 4 to 6 month range, where the infant to toddler range, having massive decreases in prevalence of peanut allergies. And then there was a study that you looked at where if they did increase or actually introduce a peanut type of food, they had an increase in peanut antibodies or what was it? It was an allergen.
Peanut. Well, it was like an increase in the
SIGE.
Yeah, it's the immunoglobulins, the antibodies fighting against the harmful substance, aka the peanuts.
Right.
So basically, it was found that I believe, if infants were introduced to peanuts at an early stage in life, like almost 80% of them would not develop the peanut allergy.
Wow. Okay.
And how it works was like if you have an infant who has severe eczema and or an egg allergy, then you want to get them tested for like those immunoglobulins, like by doing like a prick test with a little bit of like peanut oil, I don't know what they have on it, to see their reaction to it. And if they have like a higher immunoglobulin level and like they see a reaction, then obviously your kid's allergic.
Right.
But if your kid is like on the mild to moderate, mild or moderate eczema side, then you could do like slow introduction at home with like no supervision, and that's fine. So if you have like severe and or egg allergy, you would be on the more cautious side, basically.
Okay. So kind of harkening back to those parents who have like severe anxieties about their kids, either already having peanut allergies or more what we're talking about, the ones that are worried about their kid potentially having one, their infant child. Instead of kind of sitting in the hospital parking lot, giving them their first dose of peanut butter, what you're saying is that it's, you can do kind of a rule of thumb where it's like if your child already has kind of bad eczema or rashes, and especially if you know that they're already allergic to eggs or something, take them to a pediatric or allergy specialist who can do a little prick test. And they also do, in tandem with that prick test, they do a blood, they can do a blood take where they see how many allergen antibodies that are created, right, in introduction to that. And if that's at a specific threshold, kind of hold off, be really careful.
I believe it's like if I remember my finding correctly, it's about the measurement of like 35 something liters, whatever measurement they use. If it's below that, then you're good to just like kind of do trial and error at home with no supervision. But if it's above that, then you want to proceed with caution. You know, because like before, I think it was like 2010, the National Institute of like Allergies or whatever for America, they didn't have any evidence or guidelines for like how to approach peanut allergies. But there is a study in London where they basically kind of experimented with like infants that were 4 to 6 or 11 months old. And they introduced like peanuts, they did the skin prick test and things like that. And that's where the 80% like number came from, where they didn't develop the peanut
because they had that early introduction. Fascinating.
So that's where it came from. And because of that study, the National Institute made guidelines in about like 2017.
Oh wow, that's
where
recent.
The like guidelines are to that if you have severe eczema and or egg allergy, then you need to proceed with caution and you need to follow those guidelines.
Absolutely. And I think a theme that we ran into during our research, which was really interesting to me, is this is like an upcoming field. I mean, I think we'll launch into this a little bit later, but the prevalence of peanut allergies or allergies in general has only increased in the last couple of decades. And I think that's kind of really kicking some scientific minds into overdrive on trying to figure out how to prevent, treat, or even mitigate future allergens or at least the prevalence of, or an increased uptick in the allergens that are prevalent in future generations.
Yeah.
And I know that when we were doing research, I found a couple articles, even only like 6 or 7 years apart, and they kind of had drastically different approaches. And like you were saying, the ones that are kind of from the earlier 2010s, lots more caution compared to now, when they kind of, I feel like they have more ideas of what you can do. We're almost even harkening back to the era of maybe even like the 50s and 60s, where it's just kind of like, give your kid whatever and see what happens. Although we're hopefully a little bit more careful than that.
Yeah, it's ironic that you say that, because I feel like even though that's how the scientific field sees it, that's how professionals see it, I feel like everyone in the real world, parents, whoever, they, like I said earlier, they over shelter their kids too much to the extent of such growth of allergies and development of allergies. And
well, that goes into the hygiene hypothesis.
Yeah.
That was an idea that we saw in some research. And although it's not necessarily something that you can really quantify or study within like the realms of actual like statistics and numbers, because it's such a giant idea, but it's pretty much just saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, but that kids recently, at least in the last like 50, 60 years, have had a lot less exposure to not even harmful substances, just substances in general. There's not a lot of kids playing sandboxes or going outside and touching frogs and climbing up trees and eating when their hands are still dirty. And that's saying that could have caused an increase in allergens, right?
Yeah. Well, parents nowadays, I feel like they don't even let their kids fall down on the floor, and like like they get mad at them for falling down, and they're like, oh, that's dirty. But like thinking about back then, like my parents' generation, my grandparents, like they would just rub some dirt on it and like go about their day.
Absolutely.
Like they would just do whatever, like because that's what they had to do, and not necessarily they didn't care, but they didn't really have to think about it as much. But like nowadays, I feel like there's over precaution because overprotective parents, but also I feel like the buildup of allergy development can be connected to the like
almost like over sterilized environment.
Yes, but actually the overutilization and introduction of like all these new chemicals and everything. All these products,
I can see what you're saying.
Foods.
Oh yeah, that's an entirely different hypothesis too. We could absolutely launch into. Just the last little thing about that is, I've got two things actually. One, even when I was like a kid, like maybe like 16 years ago or something, I don't remember ever really seeing hand sanitizer in places. And even like as I was growing up, it became more and more prevalent. And of course, after the pandemic and COVID, it's everywhere. But the difference between like 2015 and 2008, when it comes to like walking into a restaurant and seeing like hand sanitizer or going to any sort of store, I feel like the idea, and I'm not saying that clean hands are a bad thing, I'm just saying that I think the idea of like an over sanitization of society, or being like very kind of kill everything, bacteria is bad, and it is, but there's also some good stuff, the gut microbiome, all that sort of thing. Not that I'm gonna throw my kids in dirt if I have kids later on, but I'm gonna try to get them to play outside and have pets around the house and stuff like that. So I think one way that we could start this conclusion off is kind of talking about some honorable mentions. And I say honorable because all the research we were doing was very interesting, and we found a lot of things that were kind of like less than scientific. And although that doesn't mean it doesn't have pertinence, it's also kind of not at least the spirit in which we're trying to strive for in this research. But did you want to talk about some of the different strange ways that people are trying to prevent peanut allergies in their infants?
Well, I remember one thing you had brought up earlier. You found this study where they had infants or children who had these rashes, basically kind of connecting to eczema, and then people rubbed peanut oil on them. I don't know too much about that, but do you want
Right.
to?
Yeah. No. It was basically. I mean, you kind of just summed up the
Okay.
entire thing. Basically, it was just if they had any like rashes or eczema from other sources or anything like that, as sort of not even like a treatment, but more of an opportunity to introduce the body to the allergen. They would rub a little bit of peanut oil on it, and they did some basically tests later by giving the kids who had that happen to them in their infant and toddler stage peanuts, and basically it was like a 70% no prevalence for peanut allergy. And although it wasn't like the best kind of double blind, very rigorous academic study, it was interesting to see at least. And that kind of goes back to what we're talking about with like the older generations and our grandparents who are just basically like, there's almost no rules. You know, you just like eat whatever.
Yeah.
And I know specifically for me, like having a conversation with my grandma about kind of schooling in general a couple years ago, there was no peanut table. There was no, oh, don't bring this to school, be careful of eggs. I mean, they just, sat down, ate their lunches, and went back to class. That was it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like nowadays parents, like going back to the over-sheltered thing,
Right.
they're so particular and anal about, not saying it's a bad thing, about what's going into their children's bodies.
Right.
To the point where it's like, oh, that egg has too much cholesterol. But in reality, the cholesterol is good for you.
Right.
And in moderation, of course.
Yeah.
But I feel like they're to the point where, going back to the sanitation thing,
right.
where it's like they want to eliminate everything.
Yeah.
So it's like too extreme.
Exactly.
I feel like.
And there's also this kind of, I mean, we've noticed this, both of us as nutrition makers have noticed this, but the idea of people wanting like a quick fix almost.
Yeah.
And there's all these different weird products like goos and granola bars and squeeze juices and stuff that are have antioxidants and are heart healthy and low in saturated fat and all this stuff that they're giving to their kids, and it's like, what happened to giving them some apples and a bell pepper? You know what I mean? Like fruits and vegetables still exist, people. We don't need to like process and package this into something that's new and improved, right?
I feel like people are overcomplicating things.
Absolutely.
Like, just go back to the caveman mindset. Just go back to like picking fruits out of your garden, because like honestly, I have never tasted better tasting food and produce than ones picked out of a garden.
100%.
Just like go back to the basics, feed your kids apples. You could make your own peanut butter at home. Like
that's also true. Yeah.
A lot of people think that making things from scratch is like so hard, and at first it will take more time because you have to get used to it. But the more you do things, the more you get used to it, the faster it'll be, and the easier it'll be, the more you'll like it.
Exactly. I mean, and this is something that we could talk about for hours because we're obviously both passionate about it.
Yeah.
But I think the biggest takeaway, and throwing in like a little pepper of anecdotal experience for me, is that me and my brother, when we were children, like we loved peanut butter.
Yeah.
And basically my parents just kind of gave it to us when we were really little and started off on the solid foods. And ever since then, we've just been eating it all the time since. And neither of us have allergies. Neither of my parents have allergies. And I know that's, 2-person case study isn't very, isn't the highest thing. But hopefully, if I ever have kids, that they, one, don't have that crazy eczema reaction, don't have an egg allergy, but I'm going to try to introduce them really early on.
I mean, did you or your brother have eczema when you were younger? Or egg allergy?
Not egg allergy, I know that.
Okay.
I didn't like eggs because I thought they were kind of icky, and now they're like my favorite food. So it's like, that's a whole other thing, like tastes maturing and stuff.
Yeah.
But I don't know, I've always had like sensitive skin, but I don't think I had ever like a thing where I touched something and it would give me like a rash.
Okay, so maybe you had like light mild eczema or something.
And then that kind of goes back to what you're saying, right? Where it's like, I'm good to go, so just give me some peanuts.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
We found it here, folks.
Yes, exactly. And one more thing for the honorable mentions before we get into conclusions, and I know you have a really good takeaway from all this, is that another thing, kind of going back to what you were saying about soy products, is a couple years ago there was this idea that the prevalence of soy products specifically could be linked to peanut allergies, because like someone basically had this idea that now that the soy industry is so big and the soy milk consumption is increasing and milk is kind of dwindling, maybe that's a reason that it's kind of linked, almost like the egg allergy and the peanut allergy. Wasn't a lot of really evidence backing that idea, but it is something to think about, and it's also something that can raise the question of like, what are we going to think of in 5 to 8 years now of maybe we'll find something that is directly correlated to a peanut allergy. Maybe it is something, some sort of dye or chemical that we're putting in all these different products, but who knows? Yeah.
You know, that brings up a question I had, like, doing all this research is like, why does our body like think that these things are harmful substances? And I tried to look that up, but I found nothing. Like, there's not enough research to explain why our body sees it as harmful substances. All I found was like kind of there's hypotheses about it. It's either like genetics, environmental factors, could be like the pollution in the air, whatever.
Right. Yeah.
Or even like going back to the hygiene hypothesis, over sheltering.
And I think that was a common thing that we got in our research, where it's like even over the last like 12, 15 years, there's been a huge uptick in prevalence of these kind of studies, but we still don't know everything. You know, there is the ideas that we've had, you know, 40 years ago about allergies and now are completely different. And it's a totally evolving field. So I hope to see in the next, you know, maybe 20 years or something that both of us can figure out why exactly we're having that, or people are having that allergic reaction. But that's why science is great, and that's why it's an evolving field, and that's why we're so interested in this topic.
It's funny that you use the word evolving, because I feel like we're evolving, but like also going backwards.
Oh yeah,
because scientists are now realizing that, you know, just go back to the basics.
100%. Yeah.
Like I said, don't overcomplicate things.
Right, and we don't want to promote anyone giving their kid peanuts who they can.
Yeah.
But I do think that
introduce your kids to variety.
Exactly.
Don't be over-sheltered.
Yes, and you know, try to just give them something. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. So did you want to take it away with your takeaway from all this research?
Big takeaway was basically, if your kid has severe eczema or egg allergy, proceed with caution.
Exactly.
Go to a specialist, allergy specialist, a pediatrician, etc., and follow those guidelines. Other takeaway, if you have mild, moderate eczema, then you could just do a little bit trial and error at home. Nothing too crazy. Just try it out.
Exactly.
And biggest takeaway is just have some variety. Don't be too strict. Don't be an authoritarian or whatever. Have complete control of someone's life. Exactly,
100%. And I think caution, for me, caution is like very like, it has its place.
Yes.
But I think anything, if I've realized that if the scientists in the last couple of years are realizing like, maybe we should just start, you know, giving these kids peanuts early on, then I think that's kind of a good reason to back up the old, at least idea of doing it, because it seems like that was an idea for a long time. People started getting more allergies and they're like, I don't think it's a good idea anymore. And now we're kind of coming back, circling back to that. My biggest takeaway is that if I ever have kids, I'm gonna just try to introduce them really early on, unless they have those signs and symptoms, and I'll take them to the pediatric facilities. But mostly, the thing I wanted to end on is, I think just we need more exposure and more of a conversation about this. Because I mean, how many parents don't know any of this stuff, right?
I feel like parents just assume, and they try to fit into the professional role and do their own research on like WebMD or like whatever.
Right.
And my take is like, let the professionals do their job. They're doing it for a reason. It's not like they're uninterested in the work. It's not like they're trying to just throw some random shit, excuse my language, out there.
Exactly.
So just let them do their work. We're all trying our best, so let us try our best for your kid.
Exactly.
You know?
And then once we can figure out those things or kind of hammer them down, just spread the word. You know, like talk about it in your circles, and don't be afraid to go against the status quo. As long as you know that you're not going to bring harm to someone else. Because if someone does have anaphylaxis, like a serious shock response, they cannot have peanuts. That is absolutely not okay. But when it comes to, you know, little Billy, who is, you know, 4 or 5 months old, and you don't really know, try it out. You know, he's probably going to be okay. So that's kind of where we're going to end it, guys. We hope you learned something. We absolutely did. We'll see you next time.